I'll never forget the night the dream came true. When World Rugby made the decision to give the 2019 Rugby World Cup to Japan, they were awarding a World Cup to a team who hadn't won a game at the Showpiece tournament since 1991 and hadn't won one before that either. And yet, by the time we reached the week between the pools and the quarterfinals in their home tournament just 4 years ago, so many conversations were being had between rugby fans worldwide, glancing to each other and asking, wondering, are Japan about to win the World Cup? Nihon's climb from punching bag to powerhouse has been remarkable, one of the biggest stories in rugby ever, and the night they defeated Scotland to make the knockouts for the first time was one of rugby's greatest ever. I was in Kumamoto at the time for Wales's win over Uruguay, and the streets afterwards were packed with people in Blossom shirts just hugging each other, tears pouring from faces as images they'd never dared dream were realised on screens before them. And yet, in the years since that World Cup fairy tale, Japan have awoken in something of a cold sweat. Some deep misfortune, a bit of stagnation, and a truncated fixture list have seen the Blossoms win fewer games since the last World Cup than they did in it, only beating Uruguay, Portugal and Tonga, with Asian qualifiers no longer a going concern with them being quarter-finalists now. And yet, as the assorted contents of Pool B have learned, only a fool writes Japan off. So, with the World Cup getting so close now, how good are Japan, and what signs have we seen of Nihon repeating the trick and giving England and Argentina something to really worry about this pool stage? Whilst their run of results looks grim when put together in a column, when looked at in context, Japan's last few years presents a team right on the cusp. Those loss-soaked 3 years include this result against the All Blacks, Japan searching for a try to try and win it with 1 minute to go. They gave Ireland a proper game at the FIFA, leading in the second half, and the Irish needing a late penalty to secure the game. They were similarly fierce against Scotland, once again looking for a try to win it at Murrayfield with moments to go. And then we have this. The separation. The ball dropped over the line on the winning try with mere minutes on the clock, meaning Japan weren't the ones to end France's record winning run back last year in a match they deserved to win and would have if not for this gap between ball and fingers. It's been 3 years of so close yet so far, of near misses worth feeling heartbroken over. Between 2015 and 2019, Japan played 12 games against Tier 1 nations, winning one against Italy and drawing another against a very poor French team who admittedly did have this promising youngster coming off the bench for them to win his third cap. However, of the 10 they lost, 7 were by 20 points or more, and they conceded 50 on 4 occasions. This World Cup cycle, however, 2019 to 2023, Japan have played 11 games against Tier 1 nations, losing them all, but only 2 by 20 points or more. The same 2 losses away to England and Ireland being the only games where they conceded 50 points or more over this whole cycle. Japan are currently at the unsexy part in the process of getting better. Where the past 2 cycles have been about building a team who are world class on their day and setting everything up to make sure that day comes at the most important moments, Japan the last few years have been looking to improve their general average standard. The Blossoms at their best right now feel slightly below where it was, though a dropped winning try over the line kind of is the same thing as a draw in many ways, and they haven't played Italy so far at the time of writing, or Wales, you have a shit Tier 1 nation, but the Blossoms at their worst are so much better than they were. It's the self-betterment Marilyn Monroe probably should have promised when she made that quote. The Blossoms' average scoreline over the last 4 years has gone from 36-23 to the opposition, a 13-point loss, to 29-26 to them, 10 points shaved right off. With just 2 blips, Japan have been in every game they've played for the last 4 years, largely down to coach Jamie Joseph's increased focus on their kicking game. On that incredible night in Tokyo 4 years ago against Scotland, Japan kicked the ball in open play just 10 times, and one of them was this grubber by Timothy Lafayette for the tragically retired Kenki Fukuoka to score, and another was the world's only manga that got adapted into a fullback instead of a film or TV show, Rihei Yamanaka, putting the ball out for full time. Japan were a possession team, a patience team, as anyone who's been watching my videos for the last few years will be sick of hearing, pioneered a new structure known as the 1-3-2-2, which emphasised the lines the forwards ran, the angles they were picking, and put support around them at all times, meaning offloads, angles, support work. All of this created meterage and forward momentum to play off, not just bulk and power as other teams look to. It was a genius tactic that Japan held back until a PNC directly before the tournament, pulling out for the first game against a full-strength Fiji and tearing them to utter shreds. None of the conventional wisdom seemed to apply to Japan. Moments where teams would normally kick remained chances to play. Passes other players would be afraid to throw in the Barbars game were scarcely interesting, were chugged without thought. Last year, Japan kicked an average of 36 times per match, around double their average from 2019. The majority of Japanese kicks in the last World Cup came from engaging in kicking battles where the opposition decreed, doing it on their terms, not wanting to get isolated by running without support. But in the last few years, we've started to see Japan initiate themselves, rather than just responding and waiting for a chance to run. That won't be suicide. This kick by Yamanaka is so big he probably needed 3 episodes to charge it up, and it splits the French cover and then turns them, forcing them to reluctantly engage him in a turn-based battle. But after 2 shots, Jalibert realises he's underleveled for this kind of JRPG bullshit and concedes, netting Japan a massive net gain and getting them up to halfway. However, pouring EXP into kicking has also opened up a whole new skill tree for Japan's attack. There's currently a big trend, with France leading the way, for teams coming up with organised, replicatable ways to play open, loose, unpredictable, individual decision-based rugby rather than patterned attack which can be learnt and curtailed. And with the kicking game having pinned France in the old favourite coffin corner here, Jalibert goes for France's go-to tactic, which is welly it as long as your little foot can manage. But, right, before Van der Heever has even taken the ball, the entire Japanese backline has sprinted to the far wing, the far side from where Jalibert kicked it over to this far touchline, as far away from where the scrum took place as possible, and hence where the French chase will be lightest. These players know what they're doing in advance of the kick coming in. They're anticipating this. They're looking to counterattack on this side before the scrum is even set. And Yamanaka feeds to Fita, who can draw the entire French chase, all compressed here, with Nakano, who seconds ago was only defending, immediately off the scrum, recommitting Penno and allowing the sheer numbers flooding through to do the rest. For Fita and Yamanaka remaining alive to each get a second touch, the fullback finishing with a dive that gets its own double-page splash. By flooding to the far extremes, Japan are able to isolate and overwhelm weak defences, but the benefit to a new kicking game doesn't stop there. The Blossoms are still broadly playing their 1-3-2-2 structure, but they have started to play around with a new 1-3-1-2-1 approach. The addition of a 5th group is fairly rare in Test rugby, but it has allowed Japan to stretch defences even wider than before. With so much of the game played off 10 in order to allow those forwards to pick better angles than they can off a scrum half, passing from the base, the extra 1-man group is almost a cautionary element, often standing on the inside of the 10 to give them a safety option, but also take some of the heat off. South Africa did a superb job of rushing and disrupting their pattern at source by hounding Utamura all game, prompting the Japanese 10, who had an amazing World Cup, to have a horror show in the quarter-final that broke the entire team's performance. This inside man means simply no one can charge at the 10 too quickly, because he's always got a sneaky get-out-of-jail-free card, as we see when the shape's in action here. Off the scrum, Fafita carries to an edge, Sakate, the one here, clears out and the 3-2-2 shape sets up. The first carry contracts the defence and generates fast ball, all these players out of the game, plus these taken out by Saito's pass. The inside man is here, and it means these 2 defenders need to slow their line speed. Only once Lee shapes to pass outside does Scott here commit, at which point this zone is essentially 2-on-2. These defenders now dragged apart from Scott. Riley receives the ball, and with time to skip on the outside, it pulls Narangi Tanase out from the backfield, allowing him to put for a beautiful sliding grubber, which sits up for Masashima. And whilst his offload is rough, it's in play and allows the man, the myth, the manga, Yamanaka to hack it on and pounce to score a try just 2 minutes into the game of rugby union football. The kicking has been an interesting addition for Japan, however I do think there's a question mark over how much they'll use it. Quite a few times over the last 18 months, Japan have used the ploy of starting Naoto Saito at scrum half with regular 9, Yutaka Nagari, who's also the vice captain, coming off the bench as a classic change the game impact player type role. Across the 5 games in the last year and a bit when Nagari has come off the bench, he only kicked the ball a grand total of 3 times in 5 games, where Saito in those same games box kicked pretty regularly. In that fateful drop ball test against France, Saito basically box kicked as much as any Northern Hemisphere 9. That pressure tactic really telling, but once Nagare came on, the pace up, the tempo changed, and Japan reverted back to 2019 possession above all else tactics. The same has happened repeatedly. Japan were trodden over by Fiji in the first half, but looked a different team once Nagare emerged from the bench, and most notably, in the 48 minutes against the All Blacks 15 in July, New Zealand scored 41 points to Japan's 13, with those kicking tactics backfiring on the tad, as the chase wasn't quite up to snuff, leading to counter-attack tries aplenty. And moments like this, as a bit of vision by Ruben Love, saw him identify a blind spot in the Japanese backfield. If you're going to kick long, there's often a bit of space behind the initial chase, because the kicker waits, expecting it to come long as well, and he recovers before stabbing for another kick, once the cover comes up to meet him, allowing AJ Lamb to score a lovely try. However, in the 32 minutes Nagare was on the field, the score was 14-0 to Japan, and they were unlucky not to have more. Each each time he comes on, he seems to change the game entirely. The moment they start listening to Lee Jarvis and your uncle, who always forgets Henry Slade's name and tells everyone to stop kicking, that could be Steve Borthwick now I think about it, they improve dramatically. A pressure kicking game is the easiest way to stay in the match whilst giving away nothing, and it's possible they've just been hiding a lot. The 1-3-1-2-1 is superb for ball retention and allowed them to keep the pressure on, with Nagare being maybe the fastest playing scrum half in the world, and I don't think that's hyperbolic exaggeration for effect. The pace of his pass and the rate at which he gets to a breakdown is unreal, and his impact made Japan look like an all-new team instantly. It's really hard as such to anticipate how good Japan are going to be. This November, 3 years of underperformance has been scored by notable improvements in standards, but there's also a weird, uncomfortable undercurrent sitting somewhere at the heart of this national team at the minute. 4 years ago, coach Jamie Joseph took his entire first choice 23 and signed them all to an invitational side, rather than full-time professional clubs with fixture lists and playing obligations. Joseph named himself head coach of that team and arranged minimal fixtures, leading into that PNC where they'd unveil the game-changing tactics once and for all, with most of his players having seen about 3 matches worth of game time in just over a full year. This allowed him to just drill the game plan incredibly hard and get fitness and conditioning totally up to scratch. It was a genius ploy that had enormous positive results, setting Japan on the path towards that glorious night in Yokohama. 2023, however, was slightly bumpier. Whilst Joseph requested his best players withdrew from the club season again this year, a significant number of high-profile players, led by national team heroes and captaincy contenders Michael Leach and Kazuki Himeno, very publicly refused. This became a split in the camp before eventually Joseph just gave in. The full squad would play the full season in Japan League One, no summer camp treatment putting anyone aside. Now, whether this had any morale impact, I don't know. I don't think anyone outside that camp can possibly know, but it's almost certainly had a different knock-on effect. Instead of last December, Japan went into camp in late June. Japan played then less than 2 weeks later against the All Black 15, and they looked off the pace. They looked kind of unfit towards the end of that first half, tired before they turned up, falling off easy tackles you wouldn't expect them to, and all over the shop defensively. The Blossoms played 5 games in consecutive weeks and honestly didn't improve much in any of them. Their loss to Samoa was one of the most turgid, unwatchable games of the year. The ball slippier than Bernard Laporte in a tax office, both sides making an incredible 16 knock-ons each, which is just one fewer than Scotland made in the entire Six Nations put together. Their game against Tonga ended in a win, but it was still a very messy performance. The team kind of all over the place. And then against Fiji for 40 minutes, Japan were awful. Just horrible to watch. A second red card in 3 games didn't help, but everything about them was poor regardless. Not the racers. Japan spent most of the game battering away only to cough up possession and let the Fijians do their thing and run in a wonder try from nowhere. Which begs the question, what's going on with them this summer? Whilst I can't really answer that question with any level of confidence, a quick thumb through the JRFU's Go With The Brave training video series, which has an alarmingly similar logo to the Nintendo Direct, just saying, shows a lot of fitness work of sweat, pushing themselves, skipping around empty hotel rooms because, yeah. But the only real rugby work in an hour and a half plus of exclusively behind the scenes footage with very few interviews comes in the form of a handling drill that the hotel's manager probably had to run by the insurance company and the captain's run before the Samoa test. Because this lines up with the way Japan have played. Without 6 months to beast his players on the fitness circuit, I wonder, and this is entirely speculation, whether Joseph has decided to put all his S&C work into this first block with them, despite 5 tests in a row in front of the home crowd. Japan looked like a team knackered 10 minutes into half their games. Last time, Joseph waited until half an hour before the deadline in order to showcase anything, only playing any of the players, tactics, etc. that he had in mind 3 games out from the World Cup. This time, it's possible, through circumstance, he's having to wait until the very first game against Chile itself. Because Japan have found themselves in one of the most exciting groups possible. There are currently only 3 Tier 1 nations Japan have never beaten, and they're drawn with one of them in the group, with another a likely opponent in a potential quarter-final. Joseph spent 4 years working on weaknesses to exploit Ireland and Scotland once they saw that group drawn up, and whilst he will have had to chuck half of them out when England and Argentina both sacked their respective coaches last year, he's still got plenty of tape and lots of lead-in to try and plot an unreal red and white upset for a 3rd World Cup in a row. Because neither of those results are beyond Japan. The quality is in this side. There's been some real controversy back in Japan over Joseph's selections lately, yet the team is still stuffed with quality. Ryota Nakamura, the 12, is one of the most underrated players in the world. Shogo Nakano has a real touch of class about him in the centre, very familiar with Nakamura playing together at club level. And Tomoko Yasada, a 3rd centre, has been Japan's breakthrough player this year. He's been utterly box office to watch. Just such a lively kind of Wesley Fofana-esque centre. Whilst they still have the incredible talent of Kotaro Mashishima at fullback, Michael Leach as ever in the back row, Amoto Fakatava is also a fantastic player who's been playing mostly in the second row for them, and Jiwon Gu is a phenomenal scrummager. We've seen their scrum struggle quite notably a lot, and almost always it has been solved by Gu coming on or starting in the first place because he went off. He is a brilliant scrummager and a prop to really keep an eye on. And then, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my boy, the one, the only, Kazuki Himeno. One of the best players on the planet. I will go as far as saying I think he's absolutely unbelievable. Only got better for a spell over in New Zealand and has come back and developed into the leadership option I think we all saw coming, captaining Japan for the first time earlier this year. He's just an all-round Swiss Army knife jack, everything you could possibly want from a back rower threat. He's an unbelievable carry, he's incredibly smart, he's such a breakdown threat, he's a really, really good finisher, literally everything you could want from a rugby player. I'm going to upgrade my take to. He's just phenomenal, and I can't wait to see him pull back on that shirt at his second World Cup. Because Japan have been underperforming, yet you wonder how much of that will matter when the big day comes around. Because Japan are still and forever the team in World Rugby who dreams the biggest, who aims the highest, and who creates the nights we're most likely to never forget. Thank you for watching that. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you had a wonderful, wonderful time. I am here in Paris, where the World Cup will begin in just a few days' time. And tomorrow we're holding the first Squidge Rugby Meet-Up, second Squidge Rugby Meet-Up thing after the one in Japan a few years ago at No Scrum No Win. There will be an address in the description down below. Loads of stuff coming up as well. Namibia tomorrow, then France the day after. We're getting very close to the tournament now. This is part 18 of an ongoing series on every team in the World Cup. Please go and have a look around. Please thumb around, have a look at some stuff. And I'll see some of you tomorrow. I'll see the rest of you also tomorrow for Namibia. And more of you in the World Cup when it begins, which is so soon now, for more rugby.